The first explosion hit just before sunrise, shaking the desert ground like a living thing. A low thunder rolled through the air, followed by the sharp whistle of incoming rounds. The hangar lights flickered. Siren screamed, and the radio erupted in bursts of static and panicked voices. Mechanics dove for cover behind tool carts and fuel drums as another mortar struck, rattling the corrugated walls. The air filled with grit, smoke, and the sharp tang of burning fuel. Someone yelled for fire extinguishers. Another called for medics, but their words were lost beneath the roar. Outside, the tarmac was a storm of fire and sand. The Apache helicopters sat in their bays, some already hit, others still gleaming with a thin layer of dust. Shrapnel tore through sheet metal, and a fuel line burst, hissing like a snake. A mechanic crawled across the floor to shut off a pump, his face streaked with sweat and dirt. The noise was constant, pressing in from every side. The sound of survival and chaos mixed into one brutal rhythm. Through the radio, a strained voice cut through the interference. Sharp and desperate. Any Apache pilot on base? Repeat. Any Apache pilot on base. The words hung in the air, carried by static and fear. Every movement stopped. Even the alarms seemed to fade for a second as faces turned toward the comms set in disbelief. No one answered. The pilots were gone, evacuated, or down, and only the ground crews remained. The silence that followed was heavier than the explosions. Sergeant Amelia Parker stood near the far wall, her hands still black with grease. Dust swirled around her boots as she looked toward the single helicopter still intact, the one she had spent all night repairing. Its rotor blades glinted faintly through the haze. Around here, people shouted and scrambled, but she didn't move. Her heartbeat pounded louder than the sirens. The Apache waited in the smoke, its frame steady amid the wreckage. And for a long moment, it seemed to be looking back at her. Sergeant Amelia Parker was the kind of soldier most people overlooked. She blended into the rhythm of the flight line. A small figure in a grease-stained uniform, with sleeves rolled up and hair tucked under a faded cap. Her hands were always moving, tightening bolts, checking hydraulic lines, and cleaning filters until the sun dropped behind the hangar. The smell of oil and fuel clung to her skin, no matter how many times she scrubbed. She talked more to the aircraft than to people, her words soft and habitual, like a conversation between old friends. The other mechanics joked that she treated the Apaches better than herself. Maybe they were right. She had spent 7 years in Army Aviation, rebuilding engines, replacing blades, and bringing machines back to life. She knew every sound an AH-64 made, every vibration that meant trouble before an alarm ever blinked. When she worked, she lost track of time, sometimes forgetting to eat, sometimes falling asleep beside a warm turbine. Her world was measured in torque settings and rotor speeds, but beneath the precision was something deeper, something she rarely admitted. She didn't just fix them, she loved them. In her mind, every hum of an engine still carried her father's voice. She could see him again, Captain Daniel Parker, sitting beside her in a flight simulator when she was 12. The room smelled of dust and electronics, the glow of the screens casting soft blue light across his face. His hands rested over hers on the control stick, guiding her movements as the horizon steadied across the screen. "The sky," he said, "is the only place where you can be truly free." She had believed him completely. 2 years later, an engine failure took his life during a training flight. The telegram came on a gray afternoon, and the world went quiet. She didn't cry right away. She sat on the porch holding his flight badge until the metal warmed in her palm. From that day, she promised herself she would follow him, that she would earn her wings. At 18, she entered Fort Rucker's flight program and passed every written test, every maneuver, until a routine eye exam stopped her cold. The flight surgeon said her left eye was 3/4 of a diopter short, Not enough for a waiver. Not enough for the sky. The rejection letter felt like a wound she couldn't see. She didn't tear it up. She folded it once and carried it in her pocket the day she enlisted again. This time as a mechanic. If she couldn't fly them, she would keep them alive. Most nights after her shift, when the base went silent and the hangar lights clicked off one by one, she stayed behind. An old simulator sat in the corner, its screens flickering, the fans humming unevenly. She powered it up, fingers tracing invisible skies through worn controls. Sometimes she whispered into the still air, her voice barely audible above the hum. For Dad who flew, so I could dream. Then she'd close her eyes and let the horizon rise before her, chasing a sky she could never touch. The base was still shaking when Lieutenant Colonel Whitman burst through the hangar doors. His uniform was streaked with dust, headset pressed to his ear, shouting orders that disappeared into the chaos. Outside, the sky glowed orange with fire as another mortar landed near the perimeter wall. Mechanics scrambled to drag fuel hoses away from the aircraft, yelling over the sirens. 2 Apaches were wrecked, smoke rising from their twisted frames. Only 1 helicopter remained untouched, sitting at the far end of the hangar like a survivor waiting for orders. It was the same aircraft Sergeant Amelia Parker had spent the entire night rebuilding. Whitman's voice cut through the static on the comms. Any Apache pilot on base? Repeat. Any Apache pilot on base. His words echoed against the metal walls. No one answered. The silence was louder than the explosions outside. The crew exchanged glances, each face marked with the same realization: the pilots were gone, and no one was coming. For a moment, the air seemed to hold still. Then a calm voice rose from behind a tool cart, steady and clear. "Sir, I can fly it." Heads turned. Amelia stepped into the open, her cap pulled low, streaks of grease across her face. Whitman stared at her as if he hadn't heard right. "Your maintenance crew." "Sergeant, you're not flight certified." She met his eyes without hesitation. "No, sire, but I know this bird better than anyone alive. I built her. I can keep her in the air." The words hung between them, simple and absolute. Another explosion struck nearby, shaking the floor and raining dust from the rafters. Whitman looked toward the open hangar door, then back at her. The rules said no, but the war outside demanded yes. He exhaled, voice tight with resolve. "Get her airborne." "Sergeant, that's an order." Amelia grabbed her helmet, sprinting through smoke and sand toward the waiting Apache. The sound of the engines from burning wrecks roared around her, but all she heard was the rhythmic beat of her boots against the ground and the quiet conviction in her chest. She was done watching others fly. It was time to take the sky herself. Amelia ran through the smoke, her boots pounding against the cracked concrete. The air shimmered with heat, and debris whipped past her face as mortars fell somewhere beyond the perimeter wall. The hangar lights flickered through the haze, turning the sand and ash into shifting colors of red and gold. Ahead of her, the AH-64E Apache waited, its matte surface streaked with dust, rotors still motionless. She climbed the stub wing in a single movement, fingers gripping metal warm from nearby fires. Sliding the canopy open, she pulled herself into the rear seat. The primary control position, the smell of oil, hydraulic fluid, and burnt sand filled the cockpit like a living thing. Her hands moved on instinct, calm and deliberate. APU on. The soft whine of the auxiliary power unit filled the space. Fuel pumps activated. Engine 1 start. Then Engine 2. She watched the gauges rise, RPM climbing as the turbines spooled up. The airframe began to vibrate beneath her. A deep, steady rhythm that settled into her bones. Rotor RPM stabilized at 101%. She checked systems of each light winking green across the panels. Weapon systems remained in standby. The control stick was warm beneath her glove. a heartbeat of its own. For a moment, she stopped. From the pocket on her flight vest, she pulled a folded photograph. Her father stood beside a UH-1 Huey. His smile faint but steady. She taped it near the altimeter, the edges trembling in the vibration. For Dad who flew, so I could dream. The words formed silently on her lips. The cockpit lights reflected off her eyes. Steady and bright, she switched frequencies. Her voice, even through the headset. Hawk's Nest. This is Sergeant Amelia Parker. Call sign Grease 1. Spooling complete. Ready for liftoff. Static answered first. Then Whitman's voice came through, heavy with disbelief and trust. Copy that. Grease 1. You're our only air support. Make it count. Amelia eased the collective upward. The rotors blurred into motion, wind and sand spiraling in furious circles. Mechanics ducked behind tool carts as the helicopter rose, its roar cutting through the chaos. The ground fell away, and the hangar lights faded beneath her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't fixing a bird. She was flying one. The desert opened before her like a sheet of bronze, rippling with heat and dust. Amelia kept the Apache low, no higher than 200 feet, skimming the surface with a steady hand on the cyclic. The airspeed held at 110 knots. The vibration through the seat was constant, a reminder that every bolt and bearing beneath her had once passed through her hands. The target acquisition and designation system fed a glowing landscape across her helmet display, green outlines shifting as she scanned ahead. The convoy appeared on the screen. 5 enemy vehicles moving fast toward a cluster of pinned-down U.S. soldiers. Dust rising behind them like a trail of smoke. She keyed the mic, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. Hawk's Nest. Grease 1. Visual on convoy. 5 vehicles. Heavy weapons confirmed. Request clearance to engage. The radio hissed before Whitman's voice came through. Tight and deliberate. Hawk's Nest copies. Friendlies marked by infrared strobes at your 2 o'clock. Cleared hot. Amelia flipped the master arm switch to own. The tone in her headset changed. The aircraft humming like it had been waiting for permission. She selected rockets, adjusted trim, and lined up the nose. Hydra 70. 2 pairs. She exhaled once, felt the crosshairs steady. Firing. The rockets streaked ahead, 2 whitetails cutting through the morning haze. The lead vehicle exploded in a ball of flame, scattering fragments into the sand. The shockwave rattled her teeth. She banked hard left, leveled, and switched weapons. M230 chain gun. The thud-thud-thud of 30mm rounds filled the air. Tracer fire, chewing through the enemy flank. Through the scope, she saw bodies scatter. Engines. D. Smoke rising like a dark curtain. The radio erupted. Direct hit. Grease 1. You're saving our boys. She heard the words but didn't respond. Her breathing was even the kind taught in training rooms she never finished. Then the tone changed. A sharp, continuous wail filled her headset. Missile lock. Her hand moved before thought. Right brake. Flare. Countermeasure. The Apache rolled sharply. Flares burst out in brilliant white arcs, trailing smoke as they fell. The missile detonated 50 meters behind, a bright blossom of light that rocked the aircraft. The tail rotor shuddered. Amber light. Then red. Tail rotor drive. She steadied the controls, checked the gauges, saw the RPMs dip and fluctuate. Command's voice cut through the static. Grease 1. You're smoking? Return to base immediately. She glanced at the readouts, then at the grid still flashing on her display. The convoy wasn't finished. More vehicles were regrouping, still closing on the soldiers. She could almost hear her father's voice inside the cockpit. Rules were for when everything worked. This wasn't one of those times. Negative. she said quietly. "If I turn back now, they die." The radio crackled with silence. The vibration in the tail grew worse. But her hands never faltered. She nosed the helicopter down, lining up one more pass. Weapons hot. Her heartbeat synced with the sound of the rotor blades. Dust swirled below. Tracer rounds lit the sand, and every movement of her hands felt like instinct. The warning lights blinked. The alarm screamed. But she ignored them all. There was no fear now. Only precision. One last run. One last promise to keep. The Apache trembled beneath her, the tail rotor vibrating with a low metallic groan. Every movement of the pedals felt heavier now. Sluggish and uneven. Amelia steadied her breathing. Forcing the machine to hold together, she adjusted torque with the collective, compensating for the failing tail authority. Each correction came with muscle memory. Every second balanced between control and collapse. Ahead, the convoy was breaking formation. 3 vehicles still moving. 1 already burning. She had only a few hydro rockets left and a single belt of 30mm rounds. It would have to be enough. She dipped the nose, lining up for a low-altitude run. The ground blurred beneath her as she descended, the desert wind cutting against the canopy. Her voice came steady through the radio. Grease 1 engaging final targets. No reply came. Only static and her own heartbeat. She armed the rockets, fired in pairs, and watched them streak forward. 2 explosions tore through the enemy column, sand and fire twisting into the air. Switching to the chain gun, she squeezed off short bursts. Sweeping a line between the last vehicles, the 30mm shells ripped through metal and dust, silencing movement. Through the smoke, she saw U.S. soldiers emerging from cover, regrouping, their strobes flashing in the fading light. The radio erupted. Contact broken. Hostiles retreating. Friendly forces secure. Her shoulders slumped for the first time. But the aircraft reminded her of its damage. Warning tones pulsed again. The tail rotor RPM dropped, then steadied at the edge of red. She turned toward Hawk's Nest, coaxing the helicopter along with tiny, deliberate inputs. The desert below blurred with the strain of heat. Every vibration felt sharper, louder. As the base came into sight, she lowered the collective and slowed her descent. The skids hit hard, bouncing once before slamming down. The frame shuddered, then settled. The rotors wound down with a tired whine. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the hangar doors burst open, and figures ran through the haze. Mechanics, medics, soldiers, all shouting her call sign. Whitman reached her first, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. He stared up at the cockpit, his voice firm but cracked with emotion. "You violated a direct order." "Sergeant," she opened her mouth to speak, but he lifted his hand in salute. "And you saved 44 lives." The crowd erupted, chanting her name, their voices echoing through the hangar. "Grease 1, Grease 1. Amelia climbed down, her legs shaking as they hit the ground. The dust swirled around her, warm and heavy. She slipped a hand into her pocket, feeling the worn edges of her father's photograph. His words drifted through her mind. Quiet and certain. The sky is where you can be truly free. She looked up, the horizon glowing faintly, and allowed herself a small, tired smile. The days after the attack felt almost unreal. The base that had once echoed with explosions now carried only the low hum of generators and the quiet shuffle of boots. A team from the Army Aviation Safety Division arrived in pressed uniforms, their cases filled with reports and flight data. They moved through the hangar with the precision of surgeons, taking statements, collecting evidence, and speaking in clipped tones. The chaos of war had given way to the calm weight of procedure. Amelia sat in a small briefing room that smelled faintly of coffee and dust. Across from her, 3 officers watched her helmet footage projected onto the wall, frame by frame. The Apache's violent shudder filled the screen. One investigator commented on her countermeasure timing. Another noted the cyclic corrections under tail failure. The veteran pilot at the end of the table, hair silver at the temples, leaned back and spoke quietly. That recovery maneuver was textbook. No hesitation. No panics. The others nodded, their pens stilling for a moment. By the 3rd day, the report was finished. No disciplinary action. No reprimand. The summary used words like judgment, composure, and valor. At the small ceremony in the hangar, Whitman stood beside her as she received the Army Commendation Medal with the V device. Her call sign, Grease 1, was entered into the official record. Cameras clicked softly as she saluted. The noise of applause muted by the weight of what it meant. When the crowd thinned, Whitman stepped closer. His voice had lost its edge, softened by pride and exhaustion. "Your father would have been proud," he said quietly. Amelia nodded once, her throat tight. "Thank you." "Sire?" She looked toward the open sky beyond the hangar doors, the wind carrying the faint echo of rotor blades, and let the silence say the rest. 6 months later, the war zone felt like a distant echo. Fort Rucker was calm, its skies clear and blue, the sound of rotor blades replaced by the hum of ceiling fans and the rustle of paper. Inside a classroom filled with neat rows of desks, Sergeant Amelia Parker stood at the front, a marker in her hand. On the whiteboard behind her, she had drawn the schematic of a rotor assembly, lines sharp and deliberate. A group of young soldiers leaned forward in their seats, their notebooks open, their faces still carrying the restless energy of inexperience. Her voice was steady, low but commanding, the kind that made people listen without being forced to. "Rules keep us alive," she said, pointing to the diagram. "But when chaos hits and the book runs out of answers, that's when character decides who stands up." The words carried across the quiet room, landing with weight. None of them missed. The students wrote quickly, but one young trainee hesitated, his hand slowly rising. "What if we stand up, Sergeant, and we fail?" The question hung in the air, sharp and honest. Amelia paused, lowering the marker. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she smiled, a small, tired smile that carried more truth than comfort. "Then you fail," she said softly, "but at least you tried. The only thing worse than failure is watching others fall because you were too afraid to move." The room went silent again, but this time the stillness felt different. Every face was attentive, every mind turning over what she had said. They knew her lessons didn't come from manuals. They came from something lived. At the back of the classroom, Lieutenant Colonel Whitman stood quietly, arms crossed, listening. When the session ended and the soldiers filed out, he stayed behind. The room felt smaller without the noise. He stepped forward, his voice softer than she remembered. "When I told you to fly that day," he said, "I thought I was signing your death sentence." Amelia looked at him for a moment, her gaze steady. "So did I," she replied, and for the first time, they both smiled. The light outside the window caught her uniform as they stood in silence. 2 soldiers bound, not by rank, but by understanding. There were no more orders left to give, only the quiet acknowledgement between 2 people who had faced the edge of reason and found something worth saving. The hall at Fort Rucker was quiet, filled with the soft hum of air conditioning and the faint echo of rotor blades from a distant training field. Afternoon light spilled through the tall windows, turning the polished floor to gold. Along one wall stood a glass display case built into the structure, its interior lit by a gentle white glow. Inside, 2 sets of Army Aviation wings rested side by side. One was aged and tarnished, the metal dulled by time, marked with the nameplate Captain D. Parker. Fly safe. The other was new, its silver sheen reflecting every glimmer of light. Engraved with Sergeant A. Parker. Greece 1. Between them lay a faded photograph. A man and his young daughter smiled beside an old UH-1 Huey helicopter. Sunlight bright on their faces, uniforms crisp and proud. Beneath the picture, a brass plaque read, "She fixed the bird, then flew it." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of an entire story. The kind few could live and fewer could understand. The air in the hall felt sacred, a quiet reverence that belonged to those who had risked everything for something greater than themselves. Amelia stood before the glass, her reflection blending faintly with her father's wings. The light caught her uniform, tracing the lines of her service patch. Her name, her story. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "We did it. Dad." The sound disappeared into the stillness, carried somewhere only she could follow. She turned toward the open hallway, boots soft against the floor. Outside, the hum of helicopters drifted across the late afternoon air. She paused, looking up as one passed overhead, the light fading behind its rotors. Heroes aren't always the ones who fly, she thought. Sometimes they're the ones who build the wings. The horizon stretched wide and calm before her, and she walked toward it, steady and unhurried. The sound of flight echoing in the distance. Courage doesn't always roar from the skies. Sometimes it begins in silence, in the steady hands of someone who refuses to stand aside. Sergeant Amelia Parker's story reminds us that real bravery is not about orders or rank. It's about stepping forward when no one else will. If you believe that kind of courage deserves a salute, leave yours in the comments below. And if you want to hear more true stories of valor, sacrifice, and heart, subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories. Because some heroes fix the wings before they ever fly them, and their stories deserve to be remembered.